Eylon Levy, the British Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, says Israel should stop and think, and he's very concerned by what's happening in Rafah. What's your response?
That after the October 7 massacre, we are proceeding with the destruction of Hamas's military machine, and that we urge civilians to get out of the way because we don't want them to be hurt.
Where should they
Hamas
go?
has two strategies. Well, there are areas north of Rafah where we have already cleared the areas of Hamas, and we want to see civilians going to areas where Hamas is not operating, because Hamas has two strategies to try to survive this war. And
yeah, no, just to be very
evil.
clear, let's stick on where they should go. Are you saying that the people who you told to leave the north and go south should now go north again?
We're saying that they should get out of areas where Hamas is trying to use them as human shields, because Hamas's strategy for trying to the areas north of Rafah that have already been cleared of Hamas. Because if there is no Hamas military presence there, then Hamas terrorists cannot try to use them as human shields. Unfortunately, Hamas's only strategy for trying to survive this war is to continue embedding itself among civilians. And we need them to get out of the way because we want to go after the perpetrators of the October 7 massacre. And we do not want to see any civilians being hurt in the process.
So are you now saying that everywhere north of Rafah is now safe and that there will not be Israeli bombardment if people move into those areas?
Unfortunately, until Gaza is no longer governed by an internationally prescribed terrorist organization that is deliberately trying to hide behind civilians, Gaza will not be safe.
So there is nowhere for people to go. I mean, that's what David Cameron said today. There is literally nowhere for them to go. And he is right in saying that, isn't he?
No, we designated, for example, the Al-Mawasi area, just to give one example, as an area in the Gaza Strip where Hamas has not already embedded itself with that vast tunnel network inside the Gaza Strip to hide behind civilians. And we think that the international community should be very clear that this Hamas human shield strategy must be resisted. And if you tell terrorists that they get immunity for their military assets by hiding behind civilians, instead of trying to help civilians flee a war zone where terrorists are using them as human shields, the message you send terrorists is that it works. It works to hide behind civilians, and that cannot be the message that the world sends in this war Hamas started.
I mean, it does appear today that you are losing international support. I mean, the British government is now taking quite a strong position. The EU Foreign Policy High Representative Joseph Borrell has said that the Americans should stop sending you weapons. There has been a Dutch court ruling stopping the sending of F-35 parts because of the risk of war crimes. And according to a report from NBC, the US President Joe Biden is now referring to your leader, Mr. Netanyahu, as an asshole.
And at the same time, the White House call out from the conversation yesterday made clear that it is still the shared goal of the United States and Israel that this war should end with the defeat of Hamas. And just a few weeks ago, the European Parliament voted that there should be a permanent ceasefire, but provided that Hamas is destroyed and the hostages are released. We still see the United States, the European Parliament, and Britain to a large extent still subscribing to Israel's war goals in response to the October 7 massacre. I've seen that Lord Cameron is calling for a sustainable and permanent ceasefire. He's also explained what he means by that. In that column with the German foreign minister, he said a permanent ceasefire is only possible after Hamas lays down its arms and is no longer in government in Gaza. Now, if it's going to politely ignore the British government's request to lay down its arms, then we're going to have to force Hamas to lay down its arms, because it's spent every day since it massacred 1,200 people and abducted 253 hostages, threatening to do that again and again. I've seen the British government calling for an immediate humanitarian pause to let hostages out and aid in. And we wish that were possible. We wish it were that easy.
It is possible.
If that were an option on the table, well, unfortunately, Hamas is holding on to the remaining 134 hostages to try to emerge from this war that it started on its feet. If Hamas were willing to give us all the hostages back, if I could just please complete my sentence. If Hamas were willing to release all of the hostages in exchange for more aid in the Gaza Strip, not only would we have done it, but the previous hostage release pause from November would still be ongoing. That option is not on the table. And so we fight until we free the hostages or Hamas releases them.
Now, obviously, to widespread relief, your mission managed to free 2 hostages. But the Hamas military wing have just claimed that your bombing that accompanied that mission killed 3 hostages. What would be your response to that if it's true?
If it is true, then the blood of those hostages is on the hands of the terror organization that brutally abducted them nearly 130 days ago, and we fear has been starving and torturing and executing and raping them. And we will hold Hamas fully responsible for all loss of human life as a result of its barbaric decision to abduct people from their beds on October 7th. We want to get the hostages out, and we're aiming to get the hostages out either by physically extracting them or by putting unrelenting military pressure on Hamas to let them go. But standing by the sidelines and asking Hamas nicely to give back the hostages was never an option, and Hamas was never going to respond to that. And so we fight.
And what is your response to the Associated Press report that more than 50 people, including several women and children, were also killed in the airstrikes that accompanied this mission to free those 2 hostages? Were they collateral damage?
We think that all the loss of human life as a result of Hamas's decision to launch this barbaric, unnecessary war is horrific.
Yeah.
And we wish that
they were
Hamas had
killed
not
by your
started
bombing,
this
so
and we wish that Hamas were not deliberately embedding itself in civilian areas. Krishnan, Hamas built a tunnel network 1.5 times the length of the London Underground, according to the New York Times, with tunnel shafts poking out in schools, hospitals, and mosques around the Gaza Strip. We want to be able to fight Hamas, and that is why we are asking civilians to get out of the way, because we do not want them to be hurt when we go
after Hamas's military assets. But you've already established there is nowhere safe. I mean, you say they should get out of the way, but you have also admitted in this interview there is nowhere safe for them to go, because there is nowhere where you can say there will not be airstrikes.
And the international community must insist that civilians can be vacated away from areas where Hamas is trying to use them as human shields.
Are you saying
areas
they should go
where we
to
have already destroyed. No. To
then
areas
in the Gaza
Strip
international community should help you with this?
Look, since Israel could have gone in all guns a-blazing on October 8th, we didn't because we knew the results would be catastrophic. We gave 3 weeks warnings for civilians to be able to evacuate northern Gaza and secured humanitarian corridors for them to get out because we wanted a fair fight against Hamas without civilians in the way. We think it's horrific that UN agencies have tried to characterize Israel's actions in pursuance of its obligations under international law to protect civilians as forced displacement. Because what do these UN agencies tell Israel? You cannot attack Hamas military targets because there are civilians in the way and they might get killed, but you can't ask civilians to get out of the way because then they'll be displaced. The logical conclusion is that they are telling Israel not to attack Hamas at all and to leave it standing as it threatens to perpetrate October 7th massacres again and again. We are committed in the wake of that massacre to destroying the Hamas military
I just want to be clear what you mean.
And to doing everything we can.
When you talk about, you've called today for the international community's help. What help do you want in terms of where that 1.5 million people should go? Because what it sounds like you're calling for is for the international community to get Egypt to open the border and forcibly displace them.
That is not what I said. That is not Israeli government policy, and that is not what we would imply. We have placed no restrictions on the import of food, water, medicine, or shelter equipment in the Gaza Strip. In fact, we have more than double the capacity at the Israeli crossings for more to enter the Gaza Strip. We think it is horrific and deeply upsetting that Hamas has decided to build all these tunnel shafts and military assets inside and under people's homes and schools and mosques, and deliberately putting civilians in harm's way, because either it renders their sites immune from attack, or there is suffering, and that suffering causes pressure for Israel to cease its campaign. So we say there is more capacity for shelter equipment to enter the Gaza Strip. Countries that want more aid should send more aid, and they should activate UN agencies that have experience in disaster zones dealing with emergency relief to make sure that civilians can get that aid without Hamas stealing that aid, as it has been doing since October 7th and for the many years before.
Just finally, I want to talk to you about the Israeli documents, the international documents that were prepared about the UNRWA staff allegations. We've now seen a document that was prepared, as we understand it, to share with international partners, which named the people that you suspected of complicity in the October 7th attacks. Is there any evidence that accompanies that, which you have yet to publish? Have you passed that evidence on to the United Nations?
I can't speak specifically about any intelligence that has been shared, but I can tell you what we did expose this week. We revealed that Hamas had been running a massive server farm, the nerve center of its intelligence operations, from a bunker 20 meters underneath the UNRWA compound in Gaza. Not only that, it had been leaking electricity from the UNRWA compound.
I mean, these are claims that you're making. They can't be confirmed.
No, these aren't claims that we're making, Krishnan. No, we took journalists.
They are literally claims that you're making, and they can't be verified.
Krishnan, the New York Times. Krishnan, the New York Times was one of many international media outlets that was embedded with the Israeli army and went to see and photograph for themselves the Hamas server farm underneath UNRWA's compound in Gaza.
Yeah. Can we stick to my question? I want to know about, I mean, there were huge consequences as a result of your naming of people who worked for UNRWA. What the world has not seen is the accompanying evidence. I just want to know, is there accompanying evidence? Is there anything beyond those names? And have you shared it with the United Nations investigation that is going on? Because there is millions of pounds of aid that is resting on those claims and hundreds of thousands of lives dependent on it.
There are millions of pounds that rest not only on those claims, but on claims as verified by international media that Hamas was operating a military intelligence center directly underneath UNRWA's compound. When we said that at least 13 UNRWA staff members... Can you address my question, which is not about the tunnels, I am answering
which is about the people that you named?
When we said that at least 13 UNRWA staff members, and that's apart from the thousands of UNRWA graduates, but the 13 UNRWA staff members were directly involved in the October 7th massacre. That was the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, do you have any evidence for that?
And collusion.
My question.
Of course, because this was all collected. Because this was all collected on the basis of intelligence that has been shared with our allies. Intelligence that has been shared with our allies.
When was it shared with Britain? Because Britain claimed it didn't know.
I can't speak to the specific intelligence that has been shared with individual Western partners, but that evidence is out there. It is clear,
it's not
and it
out
comes
there.
on top of the mounting evidence. Krishnan, let me give you an example, okay? If UNRWA wanted to uncover this evidence for itself, it could. But in 2014, UNRWA was forced to evacuate its legal officer from Gaza after he started investigating UNRWA members who were complicit with Hamas.
But UNRWA gave you all those names.
Not only, no.
UNRWA gave you all the names that you have named in 2023 as its staff, as it is required to give you the full list of its staff. It gave you its full list.
In 2014, Krishnan, UNRWA started investigating staff members who are Hamas members, and its legal officer received a live grenade with a pin in it and was forced to evacuate to Jerusalem. Not my words, a report in the New York Times this week. I don't know whether UNRWA leadership has been deliberately covering up for Hamas, but the fact is it has accepted the limitations placed on it by a barbaric authoritarian terror organization. And when in the past
this is all good deflection, which you're very skilled at as a spokesman. But what I'm asking you is there direct evidence about those 13 names? Where is it? Have you passed it to the UN investigation or not?
We do not trust the UN investigation that is taking place.
So there is no evidence that you have placed in front of anybody investigating this.
The United Nations, which has been covering up the Hamas presence literally 20 meters underneath the UN headquarters in Gaza, cannot be trusted to conduct any sort of internal review.
Have you given the evidence to the US or British governments?
I'm not personally aware of what material may have been passed on between our intelligence agencies. But the evidence is out there, and we took international media to see the Hamas presence directly underneath
Not about those 13
the UNRWA
names.
Headquarters.
There is no evidence out there about those 13 names.
I cannot comment specifically on sensitive intelligence materials that may have been shared between our intelligence agencies. But anyone who wants to see the extent of the collusion between UNRWA and Hamas needs look only at the massive server farm operating underneath
answer is there
UN
is no
compound in
evidence.
Gaza. The answer, for the third time, is that I personally, Eylon Levy, cannot comment on whatever intelligence may have been shared between spy agencies. But anyone who wants to see evidence needs look only 20 meters underneath the main UNRWA compound in Gaza, as the Hamas server farm was leaching electricity from the UNRWA compound.
Do you have any evidence that
using
UNRWA
tax
knew?
money sent from the United Kingdom?
Do you have any evidence that UNRWA knew?
I think that international partners should demand to see UNRWA's electricity bills, because there is no way that electricity was going into a massive server farm underground from UNRWA's compound,
Do you
and they
have
didn't
any
see how
evidence
much
that
they were
UNRWA
spending
knew?
on electricity. Well, in 2014, as the Wall Street Journal reported just this week, the car park in the main compound of the UNRWA headquarters began sinking, probably because of a Hamas tunnel. And the Wall Street Journal quoted a former UNRWA official as saying, "Everyone knew exactly why. Nobody said it out loud."
Is that your evidence? An unnamed quote in a newspaper?
That, the fact that there was, Krishnan, how much electricity do you think goes into sustaining a military intelligence center with a massive server farm from what is supposed to be an office above ground? Do you really think that they not only could not hear
My question was, do you have any evidence that they knew? And it appears to be no.
We have very strong suspicions, and we think that the burden of proof now passes on to them to explain how it is possible that Hamas's military intelligence headquarters was leaching electricity from UN headquarters in Gaza, and they did not know. We think international donors should demand to see the electricity bills of the main UNRWA compound in Gaza before thinking of coughing up another penny to this Hamas front that for years has been indoctrinating Palestinian children and brutalizing them on values of jihad and martyrdom.
Eylon Levy, thank you very much.
Thank you, Krishnan.